Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take your sources, articles, research, historical analysis, and distill the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight into the kind of conversation that cuts right to the heart of a story.
Today we are taking on a truly monumental task, examining the life and legacy of Helmut Joseph Michael Kohl, a figure who didn't just participate in history, he fundamentally redesigned the map of Europe.
That's right. Kohl was Chancellor of Germany from 1982 to 1998. That's a staggering 16 years.
The longest tenure for any democratically elected chancellor in post-war German history.
And crucially, those years cover the collapse of the Soviet bloc and, of course, the reunification of Germany.
Our mission here is to really get into the central paradox of this statesman. Domestically, he was often dismissed, sometimes mercilessly mocked for his provinciality and his style.
Right.
Yet internationally, he was revered. I mean, we have U.S. Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton calling him the greatest European leader of the second half of the 20th century. How does that dichotomy even exist?
That is the core question we need to answer for you. We're diving deep into the tectonic shifts he oversaw. His controversial rise to power, the dramatic, diplomatic high-wire act of German reunification.
The foundation of the modern European Union.
Exactly. And the domestic turmoil that really defined his later years. This is an exploration of a political figure whose biography is, well, it's pretty much synonymous with the making of the world we live in today.
And to understand the architect, we have to look at the foundations first. Let's unpack the man before the mandate.
Okay, so Kohl was born in Ludwigshafen in 1930. He grew up in a conservative Catholic family, right in the shadow of the Nazi era. In that context, it feels absolutely crucial to understanding his generation's political drive.
It is. It's everything. The sources reveal he was deeply aware of this, which led to a phrase that became the defining Kohlism of his youth. Gnade der späten Geburt.
The mercy of late birth. That phrase is incredibly powerful, isn't it? It conveys a sense of relief and responsibility at the same time.
It does.
What exactly did it mean for post-war German politics?
Well, it was a recognition that he belonged to the first political generation that was just too young to have been actively involved in the atrocities and the leadership of the Nazi regime.
I see.
He wasn't absolving his nation, not at all. But he was sort of declaring that his generation, unlike their fathers, was free from that immediate personal historical guilt.
And that freedom allowed them to pursue a different, more confident political vision for Germany's future.
Exactly. A vision that wasn't constantly looking over its shoulder.
But the war still touched his family very profoundly.
Oh, absolutely. His older brother, Walter, died in combat in 1944, serving in the Wehrmacht. Helmut himself was sworn into the Hitler Youth just before the war ended, which was mandatory for boys his age.
And he was briefly drafted, though he never saw any combat.
Right. So you have this mix, experiencing the tragedy of the war but avoiding any real involvement in the regime's crimes. That gave him this necessary distance and perspective to operate on the international stage later in life.
Educationally, he was also breaking new ground for his family, wasn't he?
He was. First one to attend university. He started with law in Frankfurt, but then switched to history and political science at Heidelberg.
His academic focus tells you a lot about his priorities, I think.
It tells you everything. His PhD dissertation in 1958 was on the political developments in his home region, the Palatinate. Specifically, the challenges of reconstructing political parties after 1945.
So his entire worldview was built on local history, regional structures, and the CDU's role in rebuilding German democracy.
That's it. He didn't waste any time applying that knowledge either. He joined the Christian Democratic Union, the CDU, at the astonishingly young age of 16 in 1946.
16.
And helped co-found the local youth branch a year later. This really highlights the cornerstone of Kohl's power, his grassroots political mastery.
He didn't come from a political family, but he built his network from the ground up.
Brick by brick. This deep early immersion in the CDU party structure gave him an unparalleled understanding of its machinations and, more importantly, an invaluable base of loyalty.
And that paid off pretty quickly. By 1959, he was the youngest member of the Landtag of Rhineland-Palatinate. And just a decade after that,
his first major executive role. In 1969, Kohl became the minister-president of Rhineland-Palatinate. At 39, he was the youngest head of government in any German Bundesland.
What's fascinating about this period is that he developed a reputation that seems almost contradictory to the figure we know later. He was seen as a bold reformer.
He was, and it's so important to remember that.
So what kind of reforms was a CDU leader pushing in the late 60s and early 70s.
Well, they were pragmatic, state-modernizing reforms, but some were culturally sensitive for his conservative base. He focused heavily on education. For instance, he abolished school corporal punishment.
Which sounds unremarkable today, but was a traditional flashpoint back then.
Exactly. And more controversially, for the conservative wing of the Catholic CDU, he also abolished parochial schools, standardizing the education system.
So he was willing to challenge traditional power structures within his own party for the sake of modernization.
He was. He also finalized a major territorial reform of the state, the kind of vital but unglamorous administrative work that sets up a politician for future success. It showed he could navigate complex internal political battles.
And he used this period to bring in crucial allies, like Heiner Geisler.
Yes, who later became the CDU's general secretary and was key to his national ascent. This success really positioned him perfectly for the next step, challenging for national leadership.
Kohl's move to the national stage wasn't a smooth coronation, was it? It was more of a political maneuver built on patience and capitalizing on the failures of others.
That's a perfect way to put it. He secured the leadership of the CDU nationally in 1973, succeeding Rainer Barzel. And the circumstances are just a perfect illustration of high-stakes political drama.
Right. Barzel had gambled everything on a constructive vote of no confidence against Chancellor Willy Brandt in '72.
And failed. Then the CDU-CSU lost the next general election. This monumental failure created a power vacuum.
And Kohl, the ambitious regional leader, was perfectly positioned to fill it.
Becoming the national chairman in June 1973.
Wait, so if he was known as this progressive reformer in his home state, did he keep that identity when he took over the National Party?
He did not. And this is where his political acumen really shines. The source material notes a clear shift. The national CDU-CSU needed unity, especially after the progressive social democrat Willy Brandt had really dominated the narrative in the early 70s.
So to consolidate power and bridge the gap with the hardline Bavarian sister party, the CSU.
He moved decisively toward a more conservative position after '73. He basically shed the progressive label to secure the national center-right base.
He first tested his national strength in the 1976 chancellorship bid, running against the incumbent, Helmut Schmidt.
It was a very strong showing, considering the circumstances. The CDU-CSU won 48.6% of the vote, so close to an absolute majority.
But the ruling SPD-FDP coalition held on.
They did, which forced Kohl into the role of leader of the opposition, a frustrating position that led to some significant internal challenges to his authority.
Which brings us to 1980, a year that really highlights Kohl's political patience. He actually stepped aside as the candidate for chancellor.
He did. He ceded the role to Franz Josef Strauss, the powerful and, very charismatic head of the CSU.
Strauss was seen as the political heavyweight who could finally take on Schmidt.
But he failed too. And once Strauss went back to Bavaria, Kohl just quietly resumed the leadership of the opposition. His patience proved to be a masterful long-term strategy because the coalition was already starting to weaken.
And that weakness culminated in the dramatic events of 1982, where he finally seized power. Not through the ballot box, but through a parliamentary coup.
Exactly. The Social Democrat Free Democrat Coalition, the SPD-FDP, it just fractured irrevocably in 1982. The schism was rooted in economic policy.
The FDP wanted radical labor market liberalization, more austerity.
Right. While the SPD insisted on policies protecting job security and social spending, the FDP just felt the SPD was obstructing necessary economic modernization.
And that disagreement allowed the FDP to start talking to Kohl's CDU-CSU, leading directly to the pivotal moment, the constructive vote of no confidence on October 1st, 1982.
And this term constructive is so important for listeners to grasp, especially in German political history. Unlike the Weimar Republic, where parliament could just vote a chancellor out and create a vacuum.
Which, eventually allowed the Nazis to seize power amid chaos.
Precisely. The post-war Basic Law requires the opposition to simultaneously elect a new chancellor. It's designed to prevent destabilization.
So the FDP had to switch sides, ally with Kohl's bloc, and ensure he had enough votes to immediately become the new chancellor.
Correct. The FDP crossed the aisle, making Kohl chancellor. It's the only time in post-war Germany that a chancellor has been successfully deposed this way.
The irony was just palpable. The FDP had campaigned fiercely for Schmidt just 2 years earlier.
Yeah, and this defection caused a massive public outcry. There were huge questions about the democratic legitimacy of this new government.
So Kohl knew he needed a clear public mandate, and he got it through a maneuver that was itself highly controversial. intentionally losing a confidence vote to trigger early elections.
It was a necessary piece of political engineering. Under the Basic Law, the Chancellor can only dissolve the Bundestag and call new elections if a motion of confidence fails.
So he called a vote, and his own coalition partners just abstained.
They did. He and the FDP leadership strategically abstained, guaranteeing he would lose the vote he himself had called.
That sounds incredibly cynical. But the Federal Constitutional Court actually condoned it. Why?
Well, they accepted that while the move skirted the spirit of the law, it was politically necessary to resolve the legitimacy crisis created by the FDP's defection. The country needed a clear electoral mandate.
Okay, so the court ruled it was constitutional if the chancellor genuinely believed he lacked the support to govern effectively.
Exactly. And the risk paid off spectacularly. The March 1983 election resulted in a resounding victory for the CDU-CSU-FDP coalition.
And with that undeniable mandate, Kohl immediately showed his unwavering commitment to the West. His first big policy decision was to push through the stationing of NATO mid-range missiles.
Yes, and this was hugely contentious. It sparks the largest peace movement protests Germany had ever seen. But Kohl stood firm. It solidified him as a crucial Cold War player and an absolute ally of the United States.
So once he's secure in power, Kohl's focus becomes crystal clear. It's about strengthening Germany's position on the world stage.
And he had two core priorities that would define his legacy: the transatlantic alliance and absolutely relentless European integration, which was centered on the Franco-German relationship.
That relationship with French President François Mitterrand, it was the indispensable element of the European project during this decade, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, here you have two leaders from totally different political ideologies. Kohl a conservative, Mitterrand a socialist, yet their personal and political commitment to integration was ironclad.
And their bond was sealed by this single powerful image, the Verdun handshake in 1984. Can we delve into the significance of that moment?
Verdun isn't just a battle site. It's an emotional scar on the collective French and German psyche. It's the site of one of the longest and deadliest battles of World War I. So for the leaders of those two nations, still recovering from the memory of World War II, to stand there side by side, holding hands for several silent minutes as they jointly commemorated the war dead, it was breathtaking.
It was more than symbolism, though. It was a visible promise that the history of animosity was truly finally put to rest.
Precisely. And that partnership, forged at Verdun, gave them the diplomatic firepower to drive these revolutionary European projects. They were truly the architects of the institutional framework we know today.
They laid the groundwork for the Maastricht Treaty, the EU, the Euro.
Exactly. They also collaborated on creating the Eurocorps, a combined military unit, and Arte, the Franco-German cultural TV channel. It showed cooperation in military and cultural spheres, not just economic ones.
But his unwavering dedication to the United States led to an international crisis that threatened to undermine all that early progress. The Bitburg controversy in 1985.
Yeah, the intention was good. Marking the 40th anniversary of VE Day by symbolizing U.S.-German friendship, Kohl invited President Ronald Reagan to visit a German military cemetery near Bitburg.
And then the plan just exploded when it was revealed that the cemetery contained the graves of 49 SS soldiers.
The outrage was immediate and fierce. Jewish organizations, veterans, even members of Congress in the U.S. were up in arms.
So how did Kohl navigate this? It seems like an impossible position.
He argued the visit was meant to honor all German soldiers who died and to symbolize post-war reconciliation. Reagan, under immense pressure, seriously considered canceling, but ultimately he chose to proceed with the visit.
Why? I mean, what political calculation could possibly outweigh the moral offense?
It was a stark measure of Cold War realpolitik. At the time, the U.S. had just pushed through the controversial missile stationing in Europe, actively escalating tensions with the Soviet Union. Reagan viewed strong, unequivocal support for Kohl as strategically indispensable. Canceling the visit would have publicly humiliated Kohl and created a rift between the U.S. and Germany that the Kremlin would have immediately exploited. He chose geopolitical strength over short-term moral consensus.
Let's shift focus now to domestic policy during this pre-unification era. Because while he was being mocked as provincial, the sources show his second cabinet implemented some surprisingly progressive and innovative social policies.
He certainly did. Kohl wasn't just a political manager. He was a leader who was keenly attuned to the needs of the average German family and the challenge of high unemployment.
So what were some of these innovative measures?
Okay, so in the mid-'80s, we see several key programs. They extended unemployment benefits for both older claimants and for young people up to age 21. And crucially, they introduced the Erziehungsgeld, or a child-rearing allowance.
And that provided financial support to parents regardless of whether both were employed, emphasizing the value of parental care at home.
Exactly. And then there's care for the elderly, which was a growing challenge.
What did he do there?
He introduced an attendance allowance and tax incentives aimed at supporting informal carers, acknowledging the critical role family members played. And in an effort to combat unemployment, he pushed through early retirement schemes,
So employers were incentivized to let older workers retire early.
provided they replaced those vacancies with unemployed applicants. It was a proactive way to manage the job market.
That seems like a very balanced managerial approach. But there were other policies that earned him some significant public backlash.
Oh, yes. The financial pressures of the state meant that popular social policies had to be balanced by more punitive ones. For instance, student aid, which had previously been a grant, was converted into a reimbursable loan system.
Making university a lot more financially daunting for young Germans.
Right. And the 1989 Healthcare Reform Act also shifted costs onto the individual patient, didn't it?
It did, and this was widely unpopular. The reform substantially increased co-payments for things like hospital stays and prescription drugs. And most crucially, it introduced this new bureaucratic headache where patients had to pay upfront and then seek reimbursement later.
Creating an immediate financial burden for everyday citizens. It shows that underlying tension of his chancellorship. Generous in some areas, fiscally austere in others.
And finally, before the decade concluded, even this staunchly anti-communist CDU leader had to acknowledge the necessity of dialogue with the East.
Despite leading the party that had fiercely opposed Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik in the 70s, Kohl continued the policy of détente. In 1987, he hosted East German leader Erich Honecker in West Germany.
An historic event, the first ever visit by an East German head of state.
And it signaled that while Kohl was supporting Reagan's aggressive military posture in the West, he was pragmatic enough to keep communication channels open with the East German regime. It was a very sophisticated diplomatic balancing act.
As we move into 1989, we arrive at the moment that just defines Helmut Kohl's legacy. The political ground shifts violently beneath him, culminating in the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is where Kohl transitions from a skilled political manager to a giant of modern history.
And the initial phase is so critical. Kohl, like most world leaders, was caught completely off guard by the sudden breach of the Berlin Wall in November 1989.
Right.
But his response wasn't confusion, it was immediate, decisive action.
He moved with astonishing speed and political audacity. He didn't even consult his closest allies or coalition partners before presenting his plan.
That's the mark of a true opportunist politician, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. Kohl understood that this window of opportunity might close very, very quickly. Just weeks after the wall fell, he presented his now famous 10-point plan for reunification.
Seizing the initiative and defining the terms of the debate instantly.
And then, in February 1990, he flew to meet Mikhail Gorbachev in the Soviet Union and secured the absolutely critical guarantee that the USSR would not oppose reunification.
Domestically, the East German people voted for speed. The renamed Communist Party was routed in the March 1990 elections by the East German sister party of the CDU.
Which ran on a clear, unequivocal platform of immediate unity, and the resulting mechanism for that unity was a high-stakes strategic choice that saved the entire process.
The decision to unify under the quick provisions of Article 23 of the Basic Law.
Yes, which allows new states to simply adhere to the existing constitution by a simple majority vote.
Why was that so strategically superior to the alternative, Article 146, which would have required drafting a whole new unified constitution?
Because East Germany was, by this point, in a state of utter political, social, and economic collapse. Choosing the longer route, Article 146, would have required years of negotiation between East and West over fundamental issues.
Things like property rights, the Social Security model, abortion laws.
All of it. And those long negotiations would have carried enormous risks, wouldn't they?
Massive risks. They would have given outside powers, specifically France and the UK, who were deeply suspicious of a unified Germany time and leverage to interfere, slow down, or potentially halt the entire process.
So Kohl's decision to use the quick adherence of Article 23 was a brilliant, pragmatic move to lock in unity before the opposition could mobilize.
Yet the rush to unity led to what many economists consider the most catastrophic economic decision of the whole process: the 1.1 exchange rate.
This was where political popularity utterly clashed with economic reality. The Bundesbank president, Karl Kohl, he objected vehemently. He knew the East German mark was worth significantly less than the West German mark.
But Kohl insisted on a 1.1 exchange rate for wages, interest, and rent.
He did.
So what were the immediate economic consequences of that politically motivated decision?
They were devastating for East German industry. The sources explain that East German state-owned enterprises were, on average, operating at maybe 30 to 50% of the productivity of their Western counterparts.
And instantly converting their wages at a 1.1 rate meant their labor costs just tripled overnight relative to their real value.
Making them instantly uncompetitive on the world market. Precisely. East German products were now wildly expensive to manufacture, leading to mass bankruptcies, the shutdown of thousands of state-owned enterprises, and unprecedented mass unemployment.
So while it was popular with East German citizens who felt they were finally being treated equally, the policy crippled the entire regional economy for the next decade.
It did. And beyond the domestic economics, Kohl was also engaged in this diplomatic high-wire act with the four allied powers, the US, USSR, UK, and France. He had to ensure that the newly reunified Germany would be sovereign and would inherit West Germany's seats at NATO and the EC.
The 2+4 talks.
That's right. And he and his foreign minister, Hans-Dietrich Genscher, were instrumental. They had to overcome tremendous suspicion. Mitterrand in France was deeply uneasy about a powerful central German bloc.
And Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was privately, alarmingly insistent that Germany should remain divided.
She was. She feared German dominance in Europe.
So how did Kohl secure their consent, particularly Mitterrand's?
He essentially used the European project as the binding element. He agreed to accelerate the move toward deeper European integration, promising that Germany would be irrevocably tied to the EC. He was essentially telling Mitterrand, "We will accept the leash of Europe if you accept our unity."
Yet, even as he was securing this international consensus, he caused a major, self-inflicted diplomatic wound, the Oder-Neisse firestorm.
Yeah, this happened in March 1990. Kohl was reportedly trying to pander to right-wing conservative voters, specifically the Heimatvertrieben, the displaced persons who had been expelled from territories ceded to Poland after WWII.
And he suggested publicly that a reunified Germany might not accept the Oder-Neisse line as the final border with Poland,
implying a desire to restore the pre-1937 frontier. It was catastrophic. It immediately threatened to derail the entire reunification effort. It caused panic in Warsaw, Moscow, and London.
And the US and the USSR had to intervene forcefully.
They did, demanding that Kohl publicly confirm the border. He was forced to retract the comments under intense international rebuke and ultimately confirmed the Oder-Neisse border with Poland via treaty in November 1990.
So despite all these challenges, the economic disaster, the international skepticism, the border crisis, the effort succeeded. German reunification officially occurred on October 3, 1990, a monumental achievement that defines Kohl's place in history.
And that success gave Kohl an incredible mandate. He won the first all-German federal elections in December 1990 by a landslide. He now had the political capital to finalize his vision for Europe.
And his primary focus was immediately finishing what he started with Mitterrand, the creation of the European Union structure.
Precisely. His third cabinet was consumed by the negotiation of the Maastricht Treaty. This treaty didn't just establish the name European Union, it solidified the plan for economic and monetary union, setting the stage for the euro currency.
And his political clout post-reunification was essential to pushing that treaty through the German parliament.
It was. He also used that mandate to formally close other painful chapters of the past, confirming Germany was relinquishing territorial claims that had lingered since the end of the war.
Right. The treaty with the Czech Republic in 1993, relinquishing all claims to the Sudetenland.
Which was a crucial move for long-term European stability. But the sources highlight this decision was a significant disappointment for those Heimatvertrieben organizations. Kohl was prioritizing European peace over a powerful conservative voting bloc.
In 1994, Kohl secured another election victory, leading to his final term. But he faced a significantly more challenging landscape at home.
He was reelected with a reduced majority, and crucially, the opposition SPD gained a majority in the Bundesrat, the upper chamber of parliament, which gave them the power to block much of his legislative agenda. Domestically, his power was constrained.
Yet his foreign policy success continued, particularly regarding Europe and the Balkans.
He was highly effective on the international stage. He secured Frankfurt am Main as the seat for the European Central Bank, a massive symbolic and financial victory for Germany.
And he played an instrumental role in resolving the Bosnian War.
He did, leading the effort to push for international recognition of Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, often moving faster than some of his European partners. This assertive foreign policy showed that reunified Germany was ready to take a leadership role.
And it's during this final period that he brings onto the national stage a politician who would become his successor, though eventually his fiercest critic, Angela Merkel.
Indeed. It's one of history's most profound ironies. Merkel started her political life as his protégé, a little-known physicist from the East. Kohl recognized her potential, appointing her to the federal cabinet in January 1991.
She was known as Kohl's girl.
Affectionately, and sometimes condescendingly, yes. It illustrates the power of the patronage system he ran. He lifted her from total obscurity to the national stage.
But his long tenure finally came to an end in 1998.
He was defeated in the federal elections by the Social Democrat Gerhard Schröder, largely due to rising unemployment figures, especially in the former East. He resigned as CDU leader, concluding 25 years at the helm of the party. It marked the end of an era.
So the figure we've described, this masterful political manager, the architect of European institutions, the man who unified his nation, was at the same time the subject of relentless ridicule at home. We have to explore this strange dichotomy.
It's the greatest paradox of his career. Kohl never had the intellectual luster or charismatic appeal of his predecessors, Willy Brandt or Helmut Schmidt. He faced this fundamental cultural animosity from the sophisticated West German media and the intellectual left.
He was mocked for his physical presence, his perceived lack of sophistication, and his communication style, the slight local dialect, the tendency toward simplistic language.
And this all culminated in the iconic visual mockery. The Pear. The satirical journal Titanic ran a cartoon by Hans Traxler depicting Kohl as a pear or burn.
And it stuck immediately.
It became the ultimate symbol of his perceived provinciality. What's fascinating is how potent that image was. The German media effectively caricatured him as this large, simple man, even while he was executing some of the most complex geopolitical moves of the 20th century.
So if he was such a poor public speaker, often described as verbose and vague on television, how did he maintain such a tight grip on power for 16 years?
His public persona was a complete misrepresentation of his private political ability. Biographers frequently note that in private meetings, he was absolutely magnetic, a fascinating conversationalist, a perfect host. His true engine of power was his organizational skill and his prodigious memory for personal relationships.
A people person who remembered names, birthdays, and favors owed.
Precisely. He mastered the political network. He built decades of personal loyalty within the CDU, which allowed him to delegate massive policy work while keeping his internal party rivals in check through patronage. This was the Kohl system, masterful management through personal connection, not rhetorical flair.
He also left behind his famous Kohlisms, those phrases that his opponents seized upon, but which stuck in the national consciousness.
The two defining ones relate to his major power shifts. First, his description of the 1982 change in government, geistig moralische Wende, the spiritual and moral turnaround.
Suggesting he was correcting the left-leaning politics of the 70s.
Right. And the second, and more heavily mocked, was his prediction for the former East Germany, blühende Landschaften, or flowering landscapes.
The vision of the East transforming into vibrant, economically successful regions.
Yes. But critics quickly turned the phrase against him. They noted, cynically, that the landscapes only became flowering because deindustrialization was so rapid that nature just took over the failed industrial sites.
Highlighting the massive economic pain and unemployment that followed reunification.
Exactly. And despite the monumental successes, his retirement was utterly dominated by scandal. The CDU finance scandal of 1999-2000 severely stained his domestic reputation.
This was the major political tragedy of his post-chancellorship life. It was revealed that during his leadership, the CDU had operated a parallel financial system, receiving and keeping illegal donations.
And Kohl was at the center of this mechanism. He acknowledged he had led the party financial system outside legal boundaries. This involved opening secret bank accounts and using civic associations to collect unreported donations.
And the controversy was amplified when he refused to disclose the names of the donors, claiming he had given his word of honor to protect them.
Yeah, and while there was never any suggestion that he personally pocketed the money, the scandal demonstrated institutional deceit at the highest level of German politics.
It was devastating.
What?
It forced him to resign as honorary CDU chairman in 2000, and it severely damaged his standing at home.
And it provided his successor, Angela Merkel, the opportunity to reform the CDU and establish her own leadership free of the old guard.
The tragedy continued, extending into his deeply troubled final years, marked by serious health decline and profound family conflict.
Kohl suffered a severe stroke and fall in 2008, which left him wheelchair-bound and with significant difficulty speaking. His later life was dominated by the controversy around his second marriage in 2008 to Make Richter. The conflict with his two adult sons was absolute.
The sources indicate his sons were completely estranged from him, claiming they were barred from seeing him by his new wife for the last 6 years of his life.
Peter Kohl, his son, made very serious accusations. He claimed his father was essentially kept like a prisoner by Richter and suggested she pressured his seriously ill, often incapacitated father into marriage.
Even in this state, he still generated political controversy, particularly through sharp public criticism of his former protégé, Angela Merkel.
He fiercely condemned her policies of strict austerity during the European debt crisis. He believed they violated the spirit of the EU he had built. He was quoted saying, "Die macht mir meine Europa kaputt." That woman is destroying my Europe.
Wow. He also criticized her decision to phase out nuclear power after Fukushima.
He saw her decisions as abandoning his political legacy. And the family feud culminated tragically around his death and funeral arrangements.
His second wife, Make Richter, took controversial steps to control the narrative. She was criticized for barring Kohl's children from paying their respects at his home.
And she attempted to prevent Chancellor Merkel from speaking at the funeral service, instead favoring the hardline Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, a vocal critic of Merkel. It reinforced this narrative of a controlling figure attempting to use Kohl's funeral to wage a final political battle against his successor.
Despite the messy domestic turmoil and the severity of the finance scandal, Kohl's international reputation remained largely spotless. Upon his death in 2017 at age 87, he received honors that highlight this enormous chasm between his German and international perception.
The honors he received during his lifetime are staggering. The Charlemagne Prize with Mitterrand in '88, the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Bill Clinton in '99.
But the truly extraordinary honor was being named Honorary Citizen of Europe by the European Council in 1998.
That designation is incredibly exclusive. It had only been previously bestowed upon Jean Monnet, one of the original founding fathers of the European project. Receiving it places Kohl directly in the pantheon of European history,
Cementing his role not just as a German leader, but as a foundational architect of the continent.
and his death was marked by an unprecedented ceremony, the first ever European act of state.
This was a deliberate choice. Instead of holding the main ceremony in Berlin, it was held in Strasbourg, France, explicitly marking him as a European statesman above all else.
Exactly. The fact that Europe as an entity claimed his memory first speaks volumes about his legacy.
And the international tributes that poured in reinforced this idea that the rest of the world saw the architect, not the pair.
Absolutely. Former U.S. President George H.W. Bush called him a true friend of freedom. Bill Clinton lauded his visionary leadership. Perhaps most tellingly, former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev called it real luck that Kohl was the German leader during 1989-1990, explicitly calling him the architect of reunification.
Even his European colleagues, some of whom have been highly skeptical of German unity, were effusive in their praise.
Jean-Claude Juncker, former president of the European Commission, called him my mentor, my friend, the very essence of Europe. Leaders across the continent recognized that Kohl used Germany's reunification not to assert dominance, but to deepen integration, accepting the necessary constraints of the EU to ease the fears of his neighbors.
Okay, let's unpack this monumental career one last time and summarize the core takeaways you need to hold on to from this deep dive.
I think Kohl's chancellorship is defined by two interlocking pillars of statecraft. First, the decisive high-stakes move for German reunification, a political masterstroke executed with astonishing speed.
Even if it led to the economically damaging 1.1 exchange rate that caused so much pain in the East.
Right. And the second pillar, his unwavering decades-long collaboration with François Mitterrand, which engineered the modern European Union, the euro, and the subsequent expansion of the continent's peace zone.
The man himself was a fascinating study in contrast. An ambitious political manager whose immense power came from phenomenal private networking skills.
Completely defying the negative public image fostered by a hostile media who saw him as the bumbling pair. This contradiction allowed him to survive coup attempts and lead his party for a quarter century while simultaneously leading to the institutional deceit of the crippling finance affair.
That dual identity really is the heart of the story. He successfully managed Germany's transition into a sovereign, integrated world power, but he ultimately lost the trust of the German electorate and, tragically, his own family.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to mull over. Kohl was the champion of European integration, believing that continental partnership was the necessary answer to German history. Yet, he sharply criticized his successor, Angela Merkel, claiming her austerity measures during the debt crisis were destroying his vision of Europe.
This raises a profound question about the durability of the European project, doesn't it? In the pursuit of necessary economic stability, the very issues that brought him to power, did later European leaders diverge too far from the foundational principles of cross-border solidarity and partnership that he and Mitterrand championed? What truly constitutes the Kohl spirit of Europe, and can it survive the economic realities of the 21st century?
Something to consider as you watch the European Union navigate its next challenge. Thank you for diving deep with us today.